directly into the core of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus looks at the commandments and extends them. Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, 'You shall not murder. Whoever murders shall be liable to judgment.' But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. If you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, 'You fool,' you will be liable to the hell of fire. So, when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First, be reconciled to your sister or brother, then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on your way to court with him. Your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you'll be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you'll never get out until you have paid the last penny. You have heard it said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' I say to you that anyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out, throw it away. It's better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off, throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than your whole body to go into hell. It was also said, 'Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce.' But I say to you, anyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of unchastity, causes her to commit adultery. Whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard it said to those of ancient times, 'You shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord.' But I say to you, do not swear at all, even by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is God's footstool, or by Jerusalem, it is the city of the great King. Do not swear by your head. You cannot make one hair white or black. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Any more than this comes from the evil one." The reading ends here. Pope John Paul II based almost all of his teaching on the passage we just read from Deuteronomy 30. Choose life. Choose the path of life, or what he called the culture of life. Do not choose death, the culture of death, the path of death. Choose life. Deuteronomy presents before us two basic paths, two basic orientations in our lives, toward life or to death. In some ways, one could say the entire Bible is a commentary on this verse. How do we choose life? How do we choose death? The arc of the movement of the Bible tells and retells this basic truth. Thousands of years after this may have been put down, the Apostle Paul is talking to a church in the Greek city of Corinth, a fairly new church, and perhaps the most fission-driven, arguing, nasty church that ever was or ever could be. And he's frustrated with them. And in part, he's saying, you're not getting it. You continue to choose what he calls the path of the flesh, the path of death. You continue to argue and fight, and you don't even grasp what you're arguing and fighting for. You act as if it's all up to you. And then in frustration, he says, I've been giving you the basics. I've been feeding you milk from a bottle like a baby. You haven't even reached solid food yet. But he continues, God works with and through us. God will work through any agent, any different agent, to help nourish and create the conditions for the growth of human life on our own, or much more importantly, he says, together. We are content, by and large, to stay with the milk of children in religion. We rarely even lift a finger to try to reach the level of sophistication required for a heavier gourmet menu. I just read that a theologian of our church at the national level was supporting trying to write at a third grade level. Milk, not meat. But Paul declares that it's God giving the growth. We can nourish, we can support, we can do our best to be gardeners of the faith, but God, Paul says, continues to work and create on an ongoing basis the growth of our lives each and every day. Our work, Paul says, is fruitless if God had not been at work all along. We engage in ministry confident only that we trust in God to be at work in and through what we do, and sometimes from outside of all that. God brings the growth, not us. Jesus is careful to call us in his sermon brothers and sisters. We cannot call ourselves brothers and sisters when we pitch battle against a person or their followers. We are called to look at each other as brother or sister. Acknowledge that everyone can be viewed as sister or brother in Christ. Everybody is engaged in the indispensable work of God's way, God's path of life in the world. We get so frustrated. Why don't I see more evidence of God's way in the world? Our understanding, I am confident, grows by God's action and in God's good time. We're called to nurture and water God's way with compassion and love and justice. The growth, in whatever form it comes, that we can leave to God. Paul calls the Corinthians the church of God. But so often, they and we fail to realize what that looks like day in and day out. When Jesus now begins the ethical portion of the Sermon on the Mount, it is certainly not directed as milk, but the solid food of Christian ethics. Jesus re-examines the commandments and does so with stunning results. He does not see them as the apex of ethics. He sees them not as an aspiration, not as a moral horizon, but as baseline. A basic expectation of how we should live our lives. A starting point, not the conclusion of our time. Over the last few years, we have had a clamor in state after state after state to set up the Ten Commandments as public monuments. Okay. I wonder why we have not heard a similar clamor to put up the Sermon on the Mount in public forums. I think I know. We couldn't set them up in church, let alone dare put them in public. Jesus knows that our lives are a constant truce with the way we know we are supposed to live. And we have the temerity to pat ourselves on the back. Hey, I follow most of the Ten Commandments. Push come to shove, 60% is pretty good. My, isn't God lucky to have me? But Jesus says no, they're just the starting point. We have to dig deep into intent in human nature. Anybody cannot commit homicide. Few of us cannot call a name, cannot create an enemy, cannot treat someone the way they deserve to be treated with respect. It is a difficult task, Jesus says, when we find ourselves in that position, especially in worship, to seek reconciliation before we could even claim the name worship. That stops us in our tracks. Jesus says that the quality of our relationships are connected to the worship of God. Just as the Ten Commandments tablets are bound together, so are our lives of love of God and love of neighbor. Jesus says, forget these easy behaviors in the Ten Commandments. I'm calling you to an inner life that all of us are called to cultivate. That would, in the end, eliminate the need for the Ten Commandments, if only we could live in the way he suggests. The way of God is right relationship with each other and our God. That saturates our lives together. Jesus expands the Ten Commandments to a whole new world of living. What Jesus is after is the seed that impels us to great sins. What Jesus is after is eliminating the weeds so that God's growth can exist in and among us all. In other words, as the offenses become more and more minor, Jesus sees them as increasing in severity. He flips the reading. Hostility that results in verbal abuse and really merely name-calling is damaging and comes from the same root as murder. The alternative to acting in anger, Jesus says, is seeking reconciliation. We are called to be people of integrity who are faithful to the promises we make in baptism. We honor our commitments out of respect to God and each other, whether it's marriage or truth-telling or anger. This is what God's way looks like. And so in the days and weeks ahead, as we examine once again the Sermon on the Mount, may we walk away from that which stifles the best parts of our lives. May we walk about and notice, what is it that diminishes our relationships with each other and God? How do I choose life in my relationships, especially especially the ones I say are most precious in a marriage? How, in the public sphere, do I choose life and walk away from the culture of death? What nourishes my spiritual life to enable me to just begin to live the way Jesus calls us to live? Where do I choose that which is life-giving? And when, at long last, do I turn my back on the culture of death?